countries, UK, India, and Peru. And but our colleague will talk more about the formation of the team and also what we will be doing under this project. We are very excited to work on this project. Ahmedabad, in an area which is hot and dry climate, has seen a lot of transformation since India adopted a liberalized economic policy in 1991. And we have seen how people have moved from informal slum settlements to a formal settlements, either constructed by government agencies or with help from government, or sometimes people themselves. So in last 30 years, we have seen not only transformation of the city, but also we have seen or we have observed the energy practices getting changed. On other side, in Lima, where large amount of population stays in informal settlements, probably on the perimeter of the core city, and their energy practices also is getting changed. And especially when environmental challenges are looming large on us, we are more interested in understanding that how do we really how do we really map these practices, and not just mapping for academic reason, but also trying to find some of the solutions, either which we can implement that through a policy instruments or market transformation. I again welcome all of you to this launch. Uh, we will have a short video, and then one of my colleague Pamela from University College London, UK, will talk a little bit more about the program and today's program and introduce the speakers. Can we have a video, please?
Where you live and who you are makes a big difference to how easy it is to access energy. For cooking food, keeping warm or cool, lighting your home, doing work, and communicating with others. Access to affordable, reliable, and safe forms of energy services, as well as housing, are essential to improve well-being, economic opportunities, and quality of life. There is, however, an uneven landscape of inequality and poverty. Informal settlements in rapidly urbanizing cities of the Global South face the greatest injustices with inadequate housing, costly and insecure forms of energy, and exposure to energy risks. These conditions, in turn, reinforce poverty traps for inhabitants, affecting what they are able to do and be in life. These injustices become even more acute during crises such as COVID-19 pandemic, where we are told to stay home, when home cannot provide for the most basic of needs and comfort for many. Two cities, Lima and Ahmedabad, illustrate the challenges. Both are global cities with significant inequalities. However, their different histories and the strategies used to address energy and housing needs of the urban poor present contrasting approaches and offer important lessons for sustainable energy futures. Lima is Peru's capital and one of the driest cities in the world. The population has increased rapidly to 9 million. In the absence of affordable housing, settlements continue to emerge on steep slopes through the efforts of inhabitants. An estimated 2.8 million people in Lima live on the slopes and have to cope without water or electricity connection for many years, while they wait to be served by the main utility systems. Residents in Lima also access affordable housing in older and more consolidated informal settlements, as well as the neglected and deteriorating historic center. Such areas concentrate vulnerable tenants and suffer from overcrowding, precarious living conditions, and dysfunctional infrastructure. Ahmedabad is the seventh largest city in India, with 5.6 million inhabitants and 36% living in inadequate housing. The climate, with very hot summers exceeding 40 degrees Celsius, leads to acute health concerns for those living in poor quality accommodation, making thermal comfort a key priority for residents. Although many settlements emerge through the efforts of inhabitants, the state and developers play a greater role in their redevelopment, unlike Lima. Since 2010, the city's focus has been on in-situ upgrading, following a multi-story condominium model. The shift in morphology from sprawling, low-rise settlements to purpose-built apartment blocks has meant significant changes in the use of space and energy practices. Little is known about the energy practices, needs, and aspirations of inhabitants in informal settlements. The ways in which those practices change when settlements are upgraded or relocated are equally poorly understood. Also, because such settlements are often marginalized and kept off the map from public investments and data gathering, they are excluded from urban planning decisions, which in turn leads to long-standing deprivation. This raises some important questions. What are the energy practices in communities that are off-grid, and how do these relate to different housing typologies? How can these energy practices be represented in planning processes and energy modeling tools? How can the capacities of stakeholders be strengthened to tackle energy-related risks, and the voices of inhabitants be included in decision-making processes? GEMDev fosters meaningful exchange between different types of knowledge and seeks to inform strategies for sustainable energy futures and dignified habitat for all.
Thanks. Next slide, please. So I'd like to welcome you, echoing Rajan's welcome. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the project GEMDev, which is our response to those challenges. Our aim, if you can go to the next slide, please, Harsh, is to develop energy models which support inclusive decision-making and which can inform better energy planning. The reason this is important is evident if we look at the next slide, because what we have are tools for energy planning, which have been developed for the global north. There's a little example on the left here from London. And translating those tools to the global south with very large communities of informal housing, developed, sometimes self-built, it presents some real challenges if we're not to exacerbate existing inequalities. And so the approach of GEMDev is very much not about just transplanting those tools. Next slide, please. But working with our partners in Lima and in Ahmedabad to build those energy models from the ground up so that we understand how people live, what their needs and aspirations are, and how decisions impact on them, but also to make those processes of engagement as useful as possible for the people that we're engaging with. And so we're working from the individual level to the household level to the city planning level. And we're going to go through in this presentation the 4 work packages that we have. After each work package, we'll have time for 1 or 2 questions. The way that we're going to run the questions is with is if you could put them into the chat. So if you have a question at any point, please do put it in the chat. And then once the speakers have finished the presentation, we'll put the questions to them. And I should also just say that we do have translation available. So if you'd like a Spanish translation of this presentation, you can look at the interpretation button, which should be there at the bottom of your screen. Next slide, please, Harsh. Just before we go on to talk about the work packages themselves, I should say a little bit about the partners. We're bringing together academic partners in Put University in Lima, in SEPT, with Rajan in Ahmedabad and UCL here in London, together with NGOs and partners who are working already at grassroots level in the communities that we are engaging with. COVID has been a huge issue for us. We found out we'd got funding for this project pretty much as soon as it became clear that nobody was going anywhere. So interestingly, none of the team, very few of the team have ever met each other in person. Instead, we've had a very intense few months of Zoom, a little bit like this. I'm sure everybody's very familiar with that. But we have made some really good progress so far, despite that slow start. And we'd be really keen to talk to you about that and to hear your thoughts on that. So now I'd like to hand over to Asha, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the first work package. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Namaste from India. Thank you, Pamela. Uh, as mentioned by Pamela, I'll quickly take you to the two for the work package one, which is governance and planning. The work package one is mainly on the governance and planning of the two cities of Ahmedabad and housing, Ahmedabad and Lima, pertaining to the housing and energy as the focused sectors. Next slide, please. Uh, The objective of the work package one is to study, understand how energy is accessed, it is being distributed and consumed in both the cities at the household level, and to understand the similarities as well as the dissimilarities between the dwellers. Next slide, please. Uh, if we talk about the Lima context, Lima being a capital of Peru is having more than 10 million inhabitants. Mostly if you see the inhabitants are, the poor people are being moved towards the streaks of the mountains where the availability of the services is very poor and the poor are being kept even away from the basic services. Next slide, please. Exactly the scenario of energy in Lima, which has improved from the year 1990, which was only 45%, it has gone up and it has increased to 96% in the year 2019. So even the peri-urban areas have started receiving the access to energy, but the strategies which are being enforced or which are being practiced are very poor. Next slide, please. If we look at the condition of Ahmedabad, the housing condition in Ahmedabad is on an improving stage. The average slum density in Ahmedabad is 317 dwelling units per hectare. We can say that 13% of the population in Ahmedabad is living in informal settlements, where around 1.6 lakhs households are there and 7 lakh plus population is under the informal settlement. Though in the year 1870, Ahmedabad had received the municipality status, but still lot needs to be done. Next slide, please. The governance and planning, as the housing sector is a multidisciplinary affair, the governance and planning is taken care by the Ministry of Urban Development and Ministry of Housing, Urban and Poor Poverty Alleviation. There are several major acts, there are several policy frameworks, programs which are being set up by the central and the state government parallelly to improve the housing conditions. There is institutional framework, there is legal framework, and there is a policy framework which is simultaneously running from the improvement of the housing sector in Ahmedabad. Next slide, please. Since the year 2010, between 2010 and 2019, there were several policies which were being adopted and implemented for in-suit rehabilitation or upgradation of the existing slums. There were specific policies which were also being implemented and enforced for the redevelopment of the private colonies. This has really helped to bring a major change and a shift in the housing categories. Next slide, please. Whereas we talk about the electrification in Ahmedabad, 94% of the houses in the slums have received the electricity, and the success goes to the electrification program which was being launched in Ahmedabad in the year 2001. And it was in the collaboration with the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation and USAID. And it was also being supported by community-based organizations and NGOs like Seva, Saath. Next slide, please. This particular slide is basically showing the cycle of the electrification program which was launched in the year 2001 and which has given a very successful readings in providing electricity to the households in the informal settlements, which has caused a very good uninterrupted electricity supply and the theft of electricity is being reduced, by which the providers of electricity are really happy. Next slide, please. Several experts from the urban planning department, from the academic field, from NGO were being interviewed as a part of our methodology. Several experts have given their valuable inputs and their valuable insights on what are the major findings. Some of the experts have also given us the inputs which can be recommended at the policy level and which can come up to help the housing and the energy sector in a better way. The public-private partnership model is being almost suggested by most of the experts, which is being playing a very important role, and it is also being taken into consideration by the government authorities. What next? That will be next slide, please. From the expert interviews undertaken and from the basic studies which we have done so far, we would be analyzing the existing strategies and the policies and the programs which are implemented in both the cities, in Ahmedabad as well as in Lima. We would be thematically analyzing the expert interviews, and if required, we may take up the second round, which will also help us in mapping the discourses, and the ongoing analysis of the policy developments would be a task which we will be carrying up next. Thank you. Questions, please.
Thank you, Asha. That's great. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. I'm going to pick up questions that come in through the live stream, which is happening on YouTube as well. I think we have our first question is from Jaideep Gupta, and just asking, could you speak a little more about the Ahmedabad pilot and how the community will be involved in opting in or out of the pilot? I'm just going to see, do you want to talk a little bit about the role of the community and how we involve them in the project in Ahmedabad, please, Asha?
We have chosen certain informal settlements with different typology. We would be covering the household situated in those selected settlements. We would be approaching the individual households and collecting their practices, and we would be trying to put up in a way that we are able to collect at a stretch the available data and the information, which will help us in modeling and taking the task forward.
That's great. Thank you, Asha. We're going to move on in just a second to WP2, and we'll hear a lot more about that. And Harsh will be talking about, in particular, the role of the energy assessors. One of the key things, I think I would say, just in response to that question, is about the need to maximise the use of existing community networks in terms of engaging with people to ensure that we are not going in cold, and that we are working with trusted community members to access the people we need to speak to, but also to make sure that what we are doing is of benefit to them as well as benefit to us. Harsh, would you like to tell us more about that in WP2, please?
Yes. Thanks, Pamela, and thanks, Asha. Hi, everyone. I'm Harshavardhan Zatkar, and I'll be presenting the work package 2, which will be centered around energy practices and transitions in informal settlements in both Lima and Ahmedabad. So the main objective of the work package 2 will be to understand the existing energy systems and how they are related to inhabitants' access to energy, comfort in the home, and safety of the informal settlement residents. It will work on mainly three fronts. We will try to trace the networks that constitute the energy system, to reveal the power relations that regulate the access to energy for various household activities, such as cooking, lighting, using household appliances, etc. The purpose behind doing this will be to identify injustices that need to be addressed, as much as to understand the positive relations that people have built over the years within these settlements that could be further supported by various organizations. We will seek to understand the key nodes in these energy networks, and by analyzing energy practices within these nodes, we will identify the risks produced while accessing and using energy, as well as the current coping mechanisms that people have developed through their own practices. We will capture inhabitants' experiences of energy challenges, and we think that it is particularly relevant in the time of COVID-19 pandemic, where people's access to energy and use of energy has been substantially hampered by the pandemic. What we will be doing is focus on three levels of analysis. So individual level, we will try to capture practices and risks of individual members. At household level, we seek to capture thermal performance and comfort within the house. And at neighborhood level, we seek to understand energy networks that build people's access to and use of energy. To go back to the context, which was already mentioned in the previous presentation, in Ahmedabad, we know that almost 691 settlements have been declared as slums through the government statistics. And 13% of population lives in almost 1.2% of the area of the city. And 63% of these settlements are on privately owned land. The growth of these settlements has been steady since India's independence. And while the state has actively provided services in these settlements seem to be better off in terms of electricity connections as compared to sanitation and water supply. On the contrary, in Lima, people have self-built their houses almost in the absence of state intervention. As the slide shows, the self-built human settlements, marked in red on the slide, have been exponentially growing through the years. In this project, we will be working on three settlements. Barrios Altos, on the left-hand side on the slide, is a historical neighborhood that began developing more than 100 years ago. On the other hand, El Agustino began developing as early as mid-1950s on the hill slopes much closer to the city center. The houses in El Agustino have been substantially developed compared to many other settlements which have newly started developing, like Jose Carlo Mariategui, which is recently being developed or self-built in the periphery of the city, also on the hill slopes like El Agustino. Methodologically, we will take a longitudinal approach and seek to trace a trajectory of human settlements with regard to evolution of housing and energy practices. Keeping this in mind, we have chosen three typologies of houses within these settlements. Those which have been recently built and are in a precarious condition, as seen in Jose Carlo Mariategui, as well as Garudia Tekra in Ahmedabad. Others which have been built over the years and have been consolidated substantially by the people, as is seen both in Jose Carlo Mariategui and El Agustino in Lima, as well as Jadibanagar in Ahmedabad. While Barrios Altos is an interesting, unique case, in Ekta Nagar in Ahmedabad, we see that the government has already intervened and provided ground plus 12 rehabilitated apartments. And this poses an interesting trajectory of development of human settlements, which gives us a comparative understanding of how the settlements and housing and energy access has been developing over the years in different cities. We will use various participatory methods, such as focus groups, in-depth interviews, participatory mapping, to gather grounded data from the inhabitants of the human settlements. In the first package, within the work package 2, we will try to understand energy risks and capacities to act, while we will also understand people's thermal comfort within their houses, as well as the thermal performance of the house by using data loggers in the houses. We will be mapping oral histories and networks, and we'll be presenting them online for better access by the inhabitants. And we will also be training energy assessors, particularly women from the community members, to become energy assessors, learning from the work that Mahila Housing Seva Trust has been conducting over the many years in Ahmedabad. The purpose of training energy assessors from the human settlements in Ahmedabad as well as Lima is to build communities' capacity to tackle energy-related concerns and also to foster South-South dialogue between Ahmedabad and Lima. In terms of the outcomes, we hope that our projects and the outputs that we produce from this work package will help improve recognition and participation by the community members, increase awareness about the risks and capacities to act within these informal settlements, effective planning by building networks. We seek to improve capacity and collaboration, better policy making and service delivery, co-produce methods and tools for better research in the future, and improved knowledge base on the informal settlements. So I stop here, and if you have any questions, thank you.
Thanks, Hash. That's great. Does anybody have any questions here? I think I've got one which follows on from, Richard has a question, sorry, which I will go to first and then I'll bring mine in. So Richard's question, I'm glad you were able to be here, Richard. It's great to see you. Is that often individuals and groups are reluctant to engage with authorities, including the research community. So how are we going to identify and gain the trust of these people, given that it very much is a non-trivial task?
Thanks, Richard, for the question. It's one of the very important questions that we have tried to grapple with from the very beginning of the inception of this project, and therefore we have included, we are in partnership with local organizations from both Ahmedabad and Lima, who have been working in close relation with the communities over the many years. So in Lima, we are working with CDAP, SENCA, and SEA, 3 organizations who have been working on 3 different settlements in close relationship with them on different projects, housing development, risk mapping, and so on and so forth. While in Ahmedabad, we will be working with Mahila Housing Trust, who has engaged in communities, informal settlements for over the many years, and they've built the trust with the community members through their activities in the past. So we have also selected the settlements in such a way that we don't have to rebuild certain trusts and certain community relations anew, or rather, instead we seek to build on the community networks that these organizations have already built. So that would be the answer.
Thanks, Hash. And the question I have was one which came up yesterday when we did the Lima launch, which was just, can you tell us a little bit more about the energy assessors and what benefits that we hope that will have for the community?
So energy assessors is an idea that Mahila Housing Trust has already used and worked on in Ahmedabad before, and what they have done is used, or rather recruited women participants from the communities of these informal settlements to do the energy audits in these settlements. And by this, we hope to build capacities of the inhabitants, especially women, within these human settlements, so that they can not only understand the risks and capacities to act from various perspectives, but also be able to voice certain concerns that they might have, and be able to engage in the communities themselves. So in a way, to build capacities of the community members, so that they can continue to do the work without our presence. So in a way, make it more sustainable in the future.
Thank you, Harsh. That's great. So we'll move on now. More questions around the climate mitigation and adaptation and switching between fuel types. I think we possibly need to, we would need a little bit longer to go into that in detail than we have right now. We'll move on and we'll talk about the third work package, which is where the modelling bit, which is obviously an important part of the project title, comes in. And I'd like to ask Arjun to talk to us about the modelling and the work that has already been done here. Thanks.
Yeah. Hi, Pamela. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. So I'll be talking about the WP3, which deals with energy models and tools for assessing the energy consumption pattern of the settlements. Next slide, please. Yeah. So WP3 mainly revolves around the development, simulation, and analysis of the energy models using the data that is collected by WP2 and WP1 and WP3. Next slide. So the work package 3 has mainly 6 objectives. First is to address the invisibility of informal settlements in existing energy models, examine how the energy use of space and energy practice of slum dwellers can be represented in energy models, produce open access data sets allowing the representation of the urban poor in building energy models, understand how energy models can visualize, communicate, and analyze grounded and expert knowledge that can inform equitable urban development, establish a regional hub for building energy simulations in Lima, provide evidence-based policy recommendations for upgrading existing settlements, including the potential for use of solar PV. Next slide. So the research questions that we intend to answer through WP3 are: how can the use of space and energy practice of slum dwellers be represented in energy models? And how can models allow us to visualize, communicate, and analyze grounded and expert knowledge in order to inform equitable urban development? So in order to answer these questions, we will analyze the data that is collected from WP1 and WP2 and structure it in a way that we can integrate it as an input in the energy models. Combine these data sets with 3D geometric data that we will be obtaining through drone surveys. And lastly, under the WP3, we will establish a regional center of excellence for building energy simulation in Lima. Next slide, please, Harsh. Yeah. So the equipment setup that we'll be using for WP3 will be a drone and an oblique camera system for capturing the aerial image of the settlements. We will be using an RTK technology to improve the accuracy of GNSS data, and remote controller for operating and mission planning of the drone. Next slide, please. So the 3 sites for WP3 that we have selected, and as Harsh already mentioned, but we can see all the 3 of them in the map of Ahmedabad. As the first slide site, which is Jadiba Nagar, we can see is in the upper left corner. It has around 100 houses, and the settlement is more than 35 years old. The second second settlement that you see is Ekta Nagar Housing Cooperating Society, which consists of around 310 settlements, and it's around 25 to 30 years old. And the third site, which is Garudia Tekra, it is in the top right corner. It consists of around 110 settlements, and it's more than 15 years old. Yeah. So next slide, please. So here I'm going to show a sample or an example of video that we have already made for one of the previous work. So this is how the geometry is going to look like when we capture data from drone or aerial imaging from drone, and we stitch together those photographs to make a 3D model. Yeah. So once we have this 3D model ready, what we will do is we will uh, take this 3D model into a GIS file, and we will label each different point, and we convert it into a point cloud model in the GIS, and we will label different points, example building or vegetation or so. So we will classify this point cloud model into different labels so that we can identify that which component here in the model is buildings versus which are not buildings. Once we have this thing model ready, point cloud model filtered. Next slide, please. Yes, Harsh. Yeah. Once we have this points classified into buildings and non-buildings, we will filter out all the building related points, and we will remove all those non-building related points, and we'll get a clean model which consists of building geometries. Next slide, please. Once we have a clean model, we will use deep learning algorithms to identify building footprints using certain deep learning algorithms. And once we have these building footprints, we will convert these building footprints into a shapefile, which again we will be using it, and we will be combining this with the data sets that we are obtaining from WP2 and WP1, and integrating it with energy models. The next slide. Yeah. So the outcome of the WP3 is we are going to have an open access data set for the use by energy modeling community. We will have high resolution building energy models for each settlements. We will have optimized retrofit options for each settlements, including the evaluation of solar PV. We will propose designed user interface for energy models to facilitate their use by policymakers. We will have publications documenting data sets, exploring the energy footprints of different forms of settlements, policy briefs on optimized retrofit solutions, and we will also be having a special issue of buildings and cities journals.
Thanks, Arjun. That's great. Does anybody have any questions on WP3 on the modelling side of things? Here's one from Richard, who's asking, the 3D model will provide important morphological information. Will you have data on the size of the actual dwellings, meters squared? Arjun and Rajan, do you want to pick this one up?
Hi, Richard. This is Rajan Raval. Yes, we will. So the 3D model is primarily to understand the building characteristics and also to map area or volume of the building, or even up to individual dwelling units, where we'll be able to find what would be the square meter of each dwelling, whether it is in a multifamily housing or if it is ground laid slum settlement. So answer is yes.
Great, thank you. Any other questions on WP3 on the modelling side of things? I think that's probably it. So let's move on to talk about our final work package, Actionable Futures, and introduce our PI, Paul.
Thank you, Pamela. Hello, everybody. I'm going to round off the presentation with an introduction to the fourth work package, which is entitled Actionable Futures. And it's essentially about what we can do as a result of all of the previous work in the first three work packages. Can I have the next slide, please, Harsh? So essentially, we're bringing together the work from the governance and planning through looking at energy practices and transitions, and the work about on models and tools that you've just learned about. And from that, identifying the issues such as policy injustices, how much energy is being used, where the risks may lay. Importantly, we want to look at the configuration of spaces and the community social capital that they provide. Equally, how they facilitate job opportunities. And as you've heard, importantly, in respect of Ahmedabad, thermal comfort is a critical issue that we need to look at quite closely. And we need to understand how the morphology of these developments has changed over time. Next slide, please. So we want to be able to assess what we should keep and what we should change. And, you know, for instance, as you go from low-level informal developments to high-rise apartments, you may lose certain functions and facilities that may support people's livelihoods. And I think it's important that we understand the implications of those changes so that we can ensure that new developments or redevelopments provide better facilities, but they don't take away from people's ability to maintain their livelihoods and lifestyles. Next slide, please. So what we will be trying to do is demonstrate how you can make low-income neighborhoods much more visible in the policy and planning process by integrating them into the sorts of models that are used and do that in an automatic way so that it's much easier. We want to obviously inform the development of regulations and rules so that they benefit the low-income neighborhoods more than they do at the moment. And of course, we want to, through the work that we do in Work Package 3 in particular, understand how retrofit options of energy efficiency and renewable energy can be applied in existing housing, but also in the new developments. We want to, through the process that we've engaged in over the work packages, establish the methods for involving community in decision-making and hopefully transfer those on. And the ability to co-produce open space in particular between the different actors will be important. And as a result, hopefully have better energy planning and more sustainable development. Next slide, please. We're going to produce quite a lot of outputs from GEMDev in total. We'll have data on comfort. We'll have the energy models, which will allow people to visualize energy use quite clearly. We'll have some thoughts about the archetypes that one can use to have better thermal comfort and inform the investments that are being made and the policies that are being developed. We want to learn from the experience in India of the energy advisors that they already have and develop methods that these can be used in other places. And we'll do that through applying them in Lima. We want to document the energy practices, risks and capacities so that there is a record that others can review. And we want to make the something we call talking maps, which will enable the housing and developments to become much more visible. We will develop policy briefs. We intend to put together displays that can be taken around either virtually or physically. And of course, importantly, we want to publish scientific articles. Next slide, Harsh. So to conclude, I think we all recognize that the pandemic has highlighted inequalities everywhere in every society. And I think we all recognize that future developments need to address these inequalities. And I'm very hopeful that GEMDev will help in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Does anybody have any questions for Paul on how we transform the learnings of GEMDev into action? I think there was a very interesting question that came up on this yesterday in Lima, which was about how we have these two very different cities in Lima and Ahmedabad, and how much learning will be shared between the two, and how do we bring the two together, and what does that mean for other cities as well? I wonder if you could just say a few words about that, please, Paul.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, I think the way that we have had to work in the pandemic has actually resulted in much more regular communication than might otherwise have happened, and also in bilateral communication between Lima and Ahmedabad, which I think is crucially important in allowing each of the partner countries to understand their circumstances and to be able to trade experiences and skills and methods supported by the experience that we have in the UK, obviously, particularly in respect of being able to develop the models, which is one of the key expertise that my group brings to this particular piece of work. So yeah, I think it's critically important that we have that bilateral transfer.
Thank you, Paul. And a question from Jackie, which I think is probably a question for Julia and Asha to answer, about how we're engaging with city planning stakeholders to make sure that we generate their interest in the project from the beginning. Julia, would you like to pick that up first?
Oh, sure. Oops, sorry, my video's flicking on and off. One of the key things is, again, I think working with our partners who have very deep contacts and connections with the stakeholders in the cities in which we're working. So Foro in Lima have their links to local government and national government, in fact, are second to none. So we will be working through that process of Work Package 1 in Lima with those through Foro to engage with those kind of city planners and others. In Ahmedabad, again, our partners have excellent links to local government and others. So the idea is to, through the process of expert interviews, to begin to get an idea of what is happening in terms of or the challenges for energy and housing in the two cities. And then we will hopefully do a process also of engaging through seminars and others events to kind of bring stakeholders along with us. And obviously in Work Package 4, there's a very key component, which is, again, working with stakeholders, not just city planners, but with local communities, with private sector and others, to make sure that we really do create that space for these conversations and for the buy-in and engagement with multiple actors and stakeholders. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. I think that's all for questions. So Rajan, can I hand back to you?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Pamela, and thank you, Asha, Harsh, and Arjun for sharing what we have planned, and part of the work also suggests that what we are already doing and what we have accomplished so far. But yes, it is going to be extremely interesting project where one city is in a northern hemisphere, one in a southern hemisphere. When we generally talk about thermal comfort, and which is primarily connected with the seasons and building envelope, what happens in Ahmedabad in summer, probably exactly reverse happens in Lima. So it is definitely going to have a lot of cross learning, apart from learning probably one more language, Spanish, trying to understand what somebody means by thermal comfort in English, and does it same in a Spanish language, or is there some calibration required to suggest the comfort or neutral temperature level, and so on and so forth. Also, in terms of technicality, right now, what we are doing in Ahmedabad is flying a UAV at constant speed and constant height. But when we are looking at various terrain in Lima, also some adoption, some kind of change in a methodology of flying drone also would be required. So very excited to explore these things in a near future. And as a closing note, I would like to thank everyone who has joined this launch. The documentation would be available constantly through our website. Again, we have two websites, two Twitter handles, one in Spanish, one in English. But you will be able to get all information on gemdev.net website, where we will be posting the documents, events, and all update on this particular project. We also have planned some seminars which you can attend in future. And with that, I would like to thank UCL team, our colleagues in Lima. I think one or two are already present, although it might be 6 o'clock in the morning right now. But happy to have all of you here, and thank you very much for joining. Thank you. And with that, we close this launch event. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Pamela. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.